back to the Brano and Joe podcast. Our guest today is Dr. Brent Stevenor. He received his Ph.D. in IO psychology from Bowling Green State University and currently works at the National Registry of Emergency Medical Technicians as an associate psychometrician. Welcome, Brent. Thanks for joining us
Welcome.
today.
Thanks for having me, guys.
Yeah, first, congratulations on recently completing your PhD. That's a huge milestone. How does it feel? What are the first thoughts right after it?
Yeah, thanks. I'm still coming down from it. I'll be honest with you, the thing that I am still getting used to is watching TV at night and on Sundays and not feeling bad about it. So like I have been pretty good at like cutting my workday off around like 5:30 and just enjoying like my evenings and my weekends. And so like that, other than the fact that I get to do what I went to school for and I enjoy what I do, like it is really nice to be able to enjoy some free time after 6 years of not being able to do that. So
It's funny, Joe and I just did an episode with an alum of our program, Manny Elkas, and we were talking to him about what it was like graduating and being like in the working world. And that was like the exact thing he said. He's like, I finish work and then I'm done. So
seriously,
it's a real
and even
sentiment.
like because I'm remote, I work remotely, so I close my laptop and like I'm done, and then I can open my other laptop and work on other stuff or watch TV or whatever. It's awesome.
No, it's nice. I mean, you definitely deserve it. Like, master's program is one thing; it's tough, but then PhD takes it to like a whole nother step. And it's like from what we've talked to like the PhD students at Hofstra, um, like they're just busy all the time. Like you could see it on their face, and I'm like, oh, that's a lot.
Yeah, yeah, but so you both are master's students, correct?
Mhm.
Mhm.
I mean, listen, you guys are still busy. I did my master's degree before I went to BG for my PhD, so even as a master's student, you're still super busy. And when you guys are done, you're gonna really be happy to be on the other side of the hump.
We can't wait.
One thing I will say though, it's like this field of IO has such a big emphasis on like altruism. And so everybody I feel like is doing so many different things in their free time that there's probably a chance we're going to get sucked into that once we graduate too.
Oh yeah, but you might want to do that. I mean, so like one thing that I haven't lost touch with is something that I enjoy doing that I really liked to do as a graduate student is just like collaborate with folks at other universities, do research, stuff like that. To me, especially because it's not something that I need to do for my job necessarily, my job doesn't depend on me publishing anymore, right? Um, I don't really get tired of it because I only get to work on things that I want to work on. And so I'll find myself at night or on a Saturday or a Sunday working on a little bit of research that I have going on with some other folks. And I'm doing it only like purely out of enjoyment. And so that's pretty cool too. With being out of school is there's no more pressure, at least for me in the position that I'm in, to work on things that I don't want to work on. It's only things that you want to work on. So you guys might find yourself doing some extracurricular IO related activities outside of school, but hopefully it'll be because you want to do it, not because you feel like you have to for, class or something like that.
No, it makes perfect sense. How does the research and like publishing work after like post PhD? Like if you say like you found something super interesting you wanted to publish, could you do it through Bowling Green, or would you have to like find another I don't know like avenue, or can you just do it to like do it?
Yeah. So mul there's a couple different ways that you can kind of stay involved with research post PhD if you don't go academic and if you don't go into a applied like research-based institution. So my job at its core is not a research position, but there have been projects that have started up through work that we have decided to turn into PSYOP presentations or papers to be submitted for peer review publication in a journal. That process, so the good old IRB, right? You guys have to go through IRB if you want to do a project through Hofstra. We have to go through an IRB too. It's through our own institution. Um, So it's different. If I'm working on a project solely with my coworkers, we go through our own IRB, and we can submit to the same journals that any academic IO psychologist submits to, right? But let's say I'm working on a project with folks at um, BG or like Virginia Tech or wherever. If they are the leading researchers on that project, we'll still go through like the Bowling Green, the BGSU IRB, and then still we can submit to any journal that we would want to. So the IRB is always going to be there, which is a good thing, which is definitely a good thing. But the process is honestly pretty much the same as when you are in school.
That makes sense. And honestly, I can kind of see that too. Being that you went for your PhD, it seems that you probably were pretty motivated to do that research aspect. And as you were saying, you're doing it on your spare time now. So that's probably kind of where that comes from. Is that kind of also what sent you down the like route to go for your PhD in general? Was like that emphasis on the research?
No, actually, well, somewhat actually. Okay, so I was one of those people that I have a bit of a different route that I took to get to why I wanted to get a PhD and how I ended up getting one. So when I was in undergrad, I went to Xavier University for undergrad, which is in Cincinnati. And I wanted to be a professor because I wanted to teach. I always liked the idea of just like being an instructor, right? And so I thought that's all that professors did. As an undergraduate student, you know how when you would email a professor and be like, they didn't get back to me right away. You're not thinking about the fact that that teaching probably isn't their most important priority. Research is, and then also all the committees that they're on, all that stuff. You don't know all that as an undergrad student. So I was like, I want to be a professor because I want to teach. And it's like, well, what do I want to teach? And I was like, well, I don't know. What kind of psychologist is my advisor? And he was an IO psychologist. And so I was like, okay, I'll go into IO psychology. That's literally how I picked it. I was like, I'll just do what my advisor did. I was like, oh, all right, IO psychology, great. So I looked up a bunch of schools to PhD programs to apply to. And I applied to a bunch of them, a lot of really good schools. And I did no research as an undergrad, none at all. So how do you think that went for me when I applied to a bunch of PhD programs? I didn't get into a single one. I got rejected from all of them. So there's the first detour. I had to apply to some master's programs, and I'm from Northeast Ohio, so I applied to Cleveland State. Got paired up with some amazing professors at Cleveland State, and they told me what I actually need to do in order to become a professor. And I was like, you got to do research, right? You got to do well these next 2 years at CSU, get some applied experience, and then do research. So I did that. Had to take the 2 year detour, reapplied, and then had much better luck. The next time ended up going to BGSU. And then it wasn't until I got to BGSU where I started, once you're in that PhD program, you start to realize you get kind of a taste of what it would be like to be a professor a little bit. And you see all the different things a professor is actually doing that aren't just teaching an undergraduate class. That's like one of the lower things on the priority list, right? So I was like, oh, okay, this is a lot different than what I thought it was going to be. And so I still really enjoyed teaching, but then I got involved in research and realized I liked that kind of like after the fact. So long story short, I didn't decide to get my PhD because I wanted to do research. It wasn't until I started having to do research that I realized that that's actually what I like to do. So really kind of backwards, I guess.
No, I like the theme of like wanting to teach because I know a lot of people get into IO psychology because they like the psych, they like business, and they want to do that like applied aspect. And there's not a ton of people I feel like that want to get into IO psych to teach. I mean, Brandon, I feel like the students that we come across, it's like 90% practitioner at least.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's cool. I mean, I know Brandon and I have talked about wanting to teach too, but I'm with you on that research aspect. Like, I wasn't so familiar that like professors that was their main thing that they did. I was like, oh, you teach like six different classes, and like research. I was like, yeah, they do research, but like I don't know, it wasn't like a thing that I thought of. But then like after finding out, you're like, oh, like do I want to be a professor and like do research? It's like a thing you actually have to think about.
Yeah, yeah.
But now, kind of getting into like what you're currently doing. Is psychometrics a field that you wanted to do during your PhD, or did you kind of find it like post PhD?
So, good. That's a good question. This is you guys are going to learn that's my life story as I kind of just fly by the seat of my pants and see where it takes me. So, when I don't know if this is how BGSU still does it, but I didn't apply to Bowling Green to necessarily work under a certain faculty member. You just apply to the program. And you get to pick a couple of preferences once you've been accepted of who you might want to work under as your advisor, but you can always switch. And I got paired with Mike Zicker, who is known for his psychometric related work, particularly item response theory. But that was like by chance. And so once I realized that I was Mike Zicker's student, I was like, okay, I'll start studying psychometrics and IRT and things like that. So I didn't go to Bowling Green knowing that I was going to do that. But once I was like, all right, I'm having the opportunity to learn from somebody that's known for doing this kind of stuff. So I started getting really involved in doing a lot of reading about psychometrics in my first couple of years at BG. Started doing some of the research, and then yeah, that kind of became my thing. Um, which is there certainly is a nice group of academic and applied IO psychologists where I would say psychometrics is like their primary stream of research. But the thing that I struggled with is that I was the kid who I loved like research methods. I wasn't necessarily really interested in like theories. I didn't really like O-sided things, or I mean selection really kind of came second nature a little bit, but like I just liked methods and I liked measurement and things like that. So anytime we had to read like a theory heavy paper, that was not up my alley. So I would definitely say that psychometrics was kind of always, once I learned what it was, I was like, okay, yeah, this is what I want to do. Even if I go academic after I graduate, I want my area of research to be around like measurement.
Yeah, I could totally see that. And for our listeners who aren't necessarily sure, could you explain to them what psychometrics is? Because I know that's not necessarily always something that you find common, especially in like applied IO programs. Like at Hofstra, psychometrics isn't mentioned as much. So
Yep.
I think some our viewers would love to hear kind of like your perspective on what psychometrics is and the type of work that you do, Brent.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think that's super important to kind of explain because first of all, it's not it's kind of I guess it would sound like a scary word, but it's really not. So all right, let's say that you want to do a study and you want to just look at the relation between two variables and you measure both of those variables with a test, right? So let's say you want to look at the relation between conscientiousness and job performance. Well, somebody needs to have developed that measure of conscientiousness. And that's part of what psychometrics is. It has to do with measurement and test development and validation and maintenance. So largely the kind of psychometrics that I was doing in graduate school was based around like um, personality measurement. So personality scale development, validation, things like that. So anytime anybody's filling out like a Likert, strongly disagree to strongly agree, that is like base core psychometric stuff. Now, the stuff that I do for my job is a little bit more deeper into psychometrics, I guess, is the way I'll put it. And so, what we're doing at the registry is basically um, we create certification exams for people that want to go into emergency medical services. So there's four different exam levels. So still psychometrics, I work behind the scenes of a test. It's always about a test, right? So we have emergency medical responder, paramedic, EMT, and advanced EMT. Each of those are four certification exams. Now, what's a little bit different about the type of tests that I'm working with is three of the four of those are computerized adaptive exams. Have you guys ever taken one of those or heard about kind of how they function a little bit?
I think we did take one, Joe,
In our I class,
in
I think.
selection.
Are those where like your answers, like depending on what your answers are, like the future questions change and it like it adapts?
Yep, that's exactly right.
We
So a
did, yeah.
computerized adaptive test, the three of us could take the exact same exam and receive a different number of questions and a different set of questions. It's all going to depend on the next question that you receive is dependent on your response to the prior question. And so those are the kind of exams that I'm working behind the scenes on. And what's even more unique about these type of tests is they are certification exams. So either you pass or you fail. Now, obviously, you are receiving a um, continuous score on the exam. So let's say the exam ends up being 100 questions and you answer 70 of those right. There's a scale score associated with that. But all that matters with a certification exam is did you pass or did you fail? Was your score above or below the cut score? And so that's an area of psychometrics that was actually a little bit newer to me, something that I learned about in grad school, but did not do. And so now the most important thing for me as a psychometrician in my job is focusing on are we making the right decision for someone to either say become a paramedic or not become a paramedic. So the stakes on this around this cut score are really, really high. And so there's a lot of work that goes on to just make sure that somebody's test score represents their level of ability and that we make sure that when, say, you call 911, the person that shows up on your door is qualified. And so that's kind of how psychometrics is related to this like emergency medical service field that I found myself working in. But again, it all boils down to tests and validity and reliability. And that's kind of like core psychometrics.
That was an amazing explanation. I feel like you brought in a lot of like really good information to explain it. True PhD format for that answer. But with that brought a few questions to my mind, Brent. Like specifically when you talk about the reliability and validity, and like we're going to speak directly about like the type of work you're doing. How are you increasing like that reliability and validity, especially for like a cutoff score where the stakes are so intense? Because I mean it's literally a matter of life and death for that type of situation.
Literally.
So like what are you doing behind the scenes to like look into that, like that space of it where it's like the reliability and
Sure.
validity?
Yeah. So I'll turn a long story into a short one here about how let's just take for an example, like when we talk about the reliability and validity of an examination, obviously it that is based on the items that make up the test, right? Okay, so for let's say my question to you guys first is for a class that you've taken, have you ever had to create a survey and then administer it to participants?
Yeah.
We had a
Okay.
like our research methods class. We went through like a whole. Actually, wait, Brandon, we were the same group.
Yep.
So yeah, exactly that. Yeah,
Okay, perfect. And so maybe as part of that class, you created a survey, and then maybe you evaluated some of the items and you realized that this item isn't very good, and so you just throw it away. And then so let's say you take a 10-item survey and you made it 9 because one of the items just wasn't working with it didn't fit the rest of the test, right? That was like a seamless process and you just throw the item away. But in an applied setting, working for a certification organization, by the time one single test item goes from being written to being pre-tested to ending up on a scored test, it one item will cost about $1,800 to develop to examine the reliability and the validity of it. One item. And for those who don't know, when like I said, we work with computerized adaptive tests. So an item pool that's running behind the scenes of this computerized adaptive test. So the algorithm is going to evaluate your response and then pick another item out of this pool and give you another item, right? That item pool could have upwards of 1,000 items in it, minimum. Each one of those items is also one that made it through that entire life cycle of being written, being pre-tested, so examining the reliability and the validity of it, and then determining that it can be scored. So that's not even accounting for all the items that don't, they make it into pretest, and then we realize that this item stinks and we have to throw it away. So the item that stinks still cost $1,800 to throw away. And so the way there is a very, very long process that goes from, have you guys learned, I'm sure, about like content validity? Content validity is like super, super, super important for especially like a certification exam. We need to make sure that each of these items is evaluating the relevant content or the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other characteristics of someone that wants to be, say, paramedic. So we really, really rely on content validity, and then there's a variety of other types of like person and item reliability that we look at, but long story short, the process of getting an item onto a test and evaluating the reliability and validity of it takes a very long time, and it's very, very costly. Um, and so it's just a lot of having subject matter experts write the items, pre-testing the items on the examinations, having the psychometricians look at the statistics of the item, making adjustments if need to be, pre-testing it again, evaluating it, and then either it ends up on the test or it doesn't.
It's such a interesting perspective because until you brought it up, like I mean, in grad school, we create the items, we run the statistical analyses, we test them, and it's all in like an enclosed environment. It's not like anything costs. Like we're going to school. I didn't even think that like a question or an item would cost money to make. And if I'm like, and you're not even the ones making them, right? You're just the one doing those
Correct.
analyses. How is that? Is there any communication with those subject matter experts? And how does that, if there is, like, how does that communication work? Like, what is that back and forth?
Oh, absolutely. So what's actually cool, and you know what, I can't speak to other organizations that we have to work, we rely a lot on subject matter experts because, well, my PhD is in IO psychology. I have no business writing an item for someone for a paramedic certification exam, right? That's all subject matter experts. And so what you'll find is that you can they get excited about being able to be involved in the process of developing the test that determines whether or not this up and coming person is going to be able to join them as, a co-paramedic or something like that. So the relation that we have with subject matter experts is actually really, really awesome. And we have external SMEs that we will bring in and pay to do item writing and evaluation and things like that. But also within our organization, we have like a content team that is made up of like former EMS professionals. So we have like subject matter experts that work solely at the National Registry, and they are really involved with the item development and writing process. And so the way that we have to collaborate with one another is they know the content and we know what the numbers mean when we pre-test the items and whether or not this is a good item or not. And if we're getting information back that this is a bad item statistically, then we can communicate with them and say this item or this type of item is not working. One example that I'll give you of how we us as psychometricians need to collaborate with these subject matter experts to make an item is, let's say you have an item where you might want to there might be two answers that are correct. And in order to get credit for the item, the respondent would need to select both of those options to get the full point. Well, there are psychometric models that would allow for you to maybe give that person partial credit for selecting one of the two options that's correct. And that's something that we had conversations about with with subject matter experts, and they were like, "Well, wait a second. We're dealing with emergency medical services here. If a patient is, in critical condition and you only do one of the two things that's needed to be done to take care of that person, they could get really hurt. So maybe we shouldn't be giving people, quote unquote half a point or something for not doing the full thing correctly in this situation. As a psychometrician, how am I supposed to know that, right? So we really rely on subject matter experts to be able to tell us things like that, because then that informs us on what type of scoring can we use on these items.
This is this is also interesting. I feel like we could have just an episode devoted to the process of going through and like looking at these items and breaking them down. I wanted to pull at a thread that you mentioned a little bit earlier. I know we're running a little bit out of time, but I want to ask this question. So, like when
Yeah,
talking about the scaling of scores, because these adaptive tests are still putting out different answers, when it's pulling out these answers, are they all based on similar competencies? With that, is the scaling still the same with the cutoff score? Like if you get a certain amount wrong, because I'm just trying to think of like evaluating
yeah,
individuals and like people getting answers wrong or people getting answers right. Like if someone's taking the test longer but they still pass. So I was just kind
yeah.
of wondering how that works for a test like this.
Yep. So here's where the magic of item response theory comes into play with a computerized adaptive test. So let's say I take the examination and based on the way I'm responding, I am administered 90 items. And my responses to those 90 items converts to what we'll call an ability score of 1. And when I say ability score, we refer to it as theta. All that really means is a z-score. So a theta of 0 means average. A theta of 1 is 1 standard deviation above average. Okay, same thing as z-scores pretty much. So let's say I respond to 90 items. That results in an ability estimate of 1 for me. And then Joe takes the test and he receives 165 items. He could still have a theta, an ability score of 1. So when we're dealing with item response theory, or what we do particularly is called Roche measurement theory, but we won't go down that road. For this sake, they're the same thing.
Yeah.
Anyone who's a Roche measurement purist can yell at me after this, but that's the beauty of this adaptive test is it's going to give as many items as needed in order to get the most accurate ability estimate for each candidate as possible. So it's not about the number of, oftentimes you'll have people say, I responded to 149 out of 150 items and I failed. And then you'll have somebody else say, I got 60 items and I passed. And all that has to do with the person's response pattern and the amount of error around their ability score. So if the cut score is a theta of 1.0, you can get there at the minimum number of items, you can get there at the maximum number of items, you can get there anywhere in between. It all depends on the way that the candidate is responding to the test. And that's the most general way that I can kind of put it without getting to what the heck is he saying kind of
I'm
thing.
seeing the teaching coming into play. That was great.
No, we could. I feel like Brad and I we got the hang of that. I heard
Yeah,
Z score, I heard standard deviation. I was like, I know what those words mean.
this made sense.
Yeah,
No,
above average, below average. That's all
thank
it
you.
is.
Um, it does sound like really interesting work, especially just like the difference that I see between like practical practitioner versus like doing it in a grad school, which you know about, but until you actually hear about someone doing it in the real world, like the money each question costs and like the kind of
Yeah,
the hoops they have to jump through between each team to get like an item to be in the test. You don't really think about it until someone tells you. So it's
right.
cool to hear about that psychometric work. We do want to ask you one final question.
Sure.
Out of all your experience that you've had so far in your PhD program and now with your position currently, you have any tips or advice for incoming IO students or just students in general?
Yeah, I do. So let me ask you a question first. Have you ever, and it's okay if you yourself have said this because I said it too, but have you ever come across somebody that says, um, I am going applied, I don't need to do research, or I'm going academic, I don't need to do an internship?
Yeah,
I've definitely
I'm
heard it.
probably the practitioner side.
That's okay. That's okay. Those phrases get tossed around a lot in grad school, and I was one of those people that used to say that. Um, my advice is, well, first of all, what you think you're going to be doing when you start grad school is likely what you're not going to be doing. So I went to Bowling Green for 4 years. I went to grad school for 6 years. For five and a half of those 6 years, I was 100% set that I was going to be an academic. Um, and then life happens sometimes, and you're like, well, maybe I don't want to move. Let's say you have this in my situation, my girlfriend, she's still in graduate school, and she goes to Bowling Green as well, a different program, but um, I'm not moving across the country um, to pursue an academic job and going to be away from her for 3 years, right? So it should things happen where your career path might change at the last minute, like mine did. And so in order to be prepared for something like that to happen, open yourself to a variety of opportunities. So if you want to go applied, I encourage you to still try and work on a research project that would turn into a peer-reviewed publication. That is that is only going to make you more prepared for the real world. Okay, just understanding the basics of like research methods is essential, even if you go applied. On the other hand, if you want to go academic, I still encourage you to do an internship. And I did both. So I'm not just saying these things. I did both. I did an internship. I was an intern for Modern Hire, which is now HireVue. And then I also enjoyed publishing papers as well. But even when I was going to go academic, I still took the internship. And that is some of the most valuable experience that you could get because working in an applied setting teaches you that some of the research that's out there and some of the suggestions that you read in the future in the discussion section of an article are really pie in the sky and really not feasible. And so working in an applied setting um, keeps you mindful of some of the limitations that you're going to have to deal with if you are actually going to try and make a difference in an organization. So still take what you learn in grad school and try and make a difference. Try and apply what you learned from grad school into your job, but you'll also be more aware of the fact that like, yeah, I learned, I did this really awesome, 3 parameter IRT model for this project I did in grad school. And then I go to my job now and they're like, oh, we can't do that. Like you just simply cannot do that, right? You need to think more operationally now. So working on research will help you to think critically about things. Working on an applied setting will help you think more realistically about things. And so that way, wherever you end up, either academic or applied, when you graduate, I think you're going to put yourself in a better position. So don't say no to those opportunities if they're presented with you. And in fact, I encourage students to go out and like seek those opportunities and put yourself in situations where you're working on something that you didn't necessarily think you wanted to do, and that might change your mind.
I think that's amazing advice, Brent. Like, in all honesty, I feel like you touched on some stuff that we haven't had on this podcast yet, especially when looking at the research versus the applied side of IO psychology. It's really interesting because IO is such a open field in the sense of there's so much opportunity. You would think that people would be open to the idea of looking into both applied and research because of
Yeah.
that. But it's so true that like I know I caught myself saying it. I wanted to go for my PhD and I didn't even think about the fact of doing research. It's similar to what you were saying. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, I still need to keep my mind open to the fact of this because it actually works both ways. And coming from the external consulting world that I'm in right now, it's like I take something that I'm learning in grad school and they give me that we don't have enough time to do this that way. So we need to condense it. And because like the
Yeah.
timeline in working in external consulting is different, but I'm still like using the knowledge from IO, but I don't get to apply it the same way. And it would go the opposite way if I was working maybe at an internal role where I have all the time that I need to do. And then I can really apply the research and apply what we're learning in our degrees. So, Brent, I think that's incredible advice. I really hope our students hear that and keep an open mind because like we're all NIO because there's so many opportunities out there and you want to make sure that you keep those opportunities for yourself while especially while you're in grad school, whether it's like in a master's program or a PhD, because that's when the opportunity gets thrown right in your face.
Yeah, for sure. 100%. Say Like Scott Highhouse told me this, or he told our students this when we were first year students. He was like, when I was in grad school, I said yes to everything. He's like, and that worked out for me. So just say yes to a lot of opportunities. Don't turn them down because you'll regret that later on.
Dr. Nolan said the same thing, Joe, on our last episode. He said that's what
He's a
Scott
BG
told him.
grad.
Yep.
Gotta have more BG grad people on this podcast. It's great advice after great advice. But yeah, as Brandon said, it you don't want to shut yourself out from like anything to do.
Oh yeah.
We wouldn't have started this podcast. Even like we have the newsletter. We have like a IO psychology newsletter that we do at our program. And like, why not? You know, it takes a couple hours out of your week. You'll learn something, put it on your resume. You talk to other people that do it. And as you said, you never know what you're gonna do. Like I
Yeah,
definitely
you
fell
never
under
know.
that spell. Like I was like, I know exactly what I'm gonna do. I have like my mind straight, 100%. And I got to remember to like pull myself out of that and be like, well, listen, sometimes another opportunity comes up, and you can't just have, like as you said, one skill to pursue, one thing that you're gonna do, and then if it doesn't happen, what are you gonna do? You don't know anything else unless you've done taken those opportunities to try them out.
Yeah, flexibility right now, I just feel like in general, in the like at any time, but really in the grad school life is so important because before I even came to Hofstra, my mind was set on getting an MBA. And so if you're going down a path and that's the only thing you're thinking about, you close off so many opportunities. I wouldn't have ended up in IO, wouldn't have been sitting here doing a podcast like this that's helping other students. Like so it's the fact of like anything can happen and it's like tenfold of like the response to it. So like you going
Yep.
to Bowling Green got you down a path of like becoming a psychometrician and like learning about a side of IO that not as many people hear about, and look what it's done for your career, and the impact that you're having is even more dramatic because it's at a place where we were just saying it's literally life or death. So the work you're doing is dramatically
Yeah.
important. Like all because of that one decision.
Yes, and like, if, um, if I wouldn't have tried to get this internship my second year of grad school at BG, I did it just because I was like, oh, this will be a nice way to kind of see what's going on the applied side of things. At that time, remember, I thought I was going to be a professor. So it wasn't until a semester before I graduated from Bowling Green where I switched my career course entirely. And if I would have tried to switch my career course entirely and go applied, and I didn't have any internship experience on my resume, I probably would have had the same experience that I had when I was applying to PhD programs the first time. And you would probably not be interviewing me right now because I would be a seventh year graduate student. I would not be working as a psychometrician right now. So saying yes to that opportunity, even though I didn't know it was going to help me out later on, it's one of the reasons that I was able to make that change.
Well, yeah, if there's any, it looks like it worked out for you. So your advice is definitely works.
Yeah, listen to me.
but thank you, Brent, for coming on. We really appreciate it. Um, Especially that, well, the stuff about the items and the whole process was super just interesting to learn about. Like we have never talked about something like that on this podcast before, so I'm really excited to see what people say and like hear what they have to say about your situation and your position. So thank you for coming on
Yeah.
today.
Oh my gosh, yeah. Thank you guys for having me. I think that what you're doing with this podcast is awesome, and I encourage you to keep it up and keep keep having people on that have IO degrees with IO adjacent jobs, and I'm sure you'll find even more off beaten path stories than mine and how I got here. But yeah, I think you guys are doing a great job with this podcast.
Thank you so much. We really do appreciate you coming on here, and we're definitely going to be looking forward to seeing you in that professor role sometime in the future. We'll be checking LinkedIn visually to see that we're ready for it. We want to take that class.
Down the
Maybe
line.
so, maybe so. Right now I'm very happy with where I'm at.
Very
Fair
fair.
enough. Fair enough.
Thank you so
Um,
much, Brent.
Thanks, Brent.
All right, thanks guys.
Well, Joe, that was a great episode. You know, I always love how we end when we ask that question on advice because usually the advice is kind of like based around the conversation we have around and during the episode. And I just thought that his advice was so like on brand and on point with everything we kind of discussed today.
Yeah, I also really like just the variety. I mean, we always talk about it in every episode, but like the variety that you see IO can hold, like psychometrics, like I mean, it's like a word, like in the ether, but you know what I mean. It's like no one actually really talks about it, and then hearing the specifics, especially about the items and like how much each item costs, and it's like to us, it's just like I'll make a survey question in grad school. If it works, it works. If it doesn't, it doesn't. Hopefully, I get a good grade. But hearing how his process worked was super super cool.
Yeah, the process was really interesting. That when you tie financials to it, it automatically sounds way more intense. And the like career of a psychometrician in IO is something that we haven't talked about much on this podcast. So to hear about how like he's able to kind of use the IO degree and use it effectively in psycho as a psychometrician is really really interesting. I think a lot of viewers could potentially see that as a career path. Don't you think?
Yeah, we'll see. I mean, with Brent's advice, we can't stay sold on one sort of thing. And it actually is great advice. Like, I know we brought it up a little bit, but like, it's so easy to stay like single minded, just like this is what I'm going to do. By making sure you stay open minded, acquire a whole bunch of knowledge and skills is really, really super important. But thank you, everybody, for listening. We hope you enjoyed it, and we'll see you next week.
Yep. See you guys next week. Thank you for listening.